John Nunn. I'm the manager of the NOFA portion of the Veterans Housing and Homelessness Prevention Program here at HCD. I have with me some of my staff who will be doing the majority of the presentation, and we have our partners from CalVet as well who will help. How many of you have applied before? How many of you are affordable housing developers? Good. Well, there's one person in the back that has a lot of experience, and we expect to hear from him during this presentation, probably. But at any rate, you're in the right place. This is where you'll find out, not soup to nuts about our program, because we couldn't do that in an hour and a half or 2 hours. But what you'll find out are some of the changes that have occurred over the course of these rounds. So without further ado, program overview. Most of you probably know about this program, but I give you this overview anyway. This program was started by Proposition 41, which reallocated about $600 million of previously allocated bonds for affordable housing for vets. It also created a partnership between CalHFA, ourselves, and CalVet, who will jointly administer the program. Essentially, the first year we awarded 17 awards, which totaled about $63 million. The second year we did about 28 awards for $116 million. And this final round, which just ended in December, we allocated about $71 million in funding. Our goals for the program are fairly simple. They're to allocate up to about $75 million per year for the use of constructing, rehabilitation, and acquisition rehab for affordable housing for this population. This population being homeless, at risk, chronically homeless, homeless with a disability, and just generally affordable veterans. We also want to develop and implement programs that focus on this clientele. The other goal of the program, and what causes us to focus on the neediest of the needy, is that 50% of the program has to go to extra low income individuals, and 60% of those have to have supportive housing, a very important part of the program. Round 3, we had 28 projects requesting $132 million. From that, we made 16 awards. 15 of those were supportive housing. One was a transitional from a set-aside that had been established by the legislature. This is what our totals to date look like. You'll see that we have a target, a geographic target for these funds. 14% is supposed to go to Bay Area counties, 31% to Los Angeles County, 8% to Inland and Orange counties, 7% to San Diego, and 16% for other. Now, if you total all those together, they total 6%. So there's actually 24% of the funding is available to the highest project, regardless of geography. Now we'll talk about what's going on with round 4. Introduce yourself sometime.
Good morning, my name's Sherry, and I'm a housing NOFA representative. John is my manager, and I'm here with some of my colleagues. And I'm going to talk, first of all, just about the focus. It remains the same as in previous years: extremely low housing, supportive housing, and chronically homeless. As John mentioned in the previous slide, we have geographic targets. They're the same. Supportive housing maintains its advantage. We'll talk about the threshold requirements, increased minimum scores in readiness, and leverage of rental operating subsidies. We like to think that we've simplified the application, but I don't know about that. I kind of tend to disagree. The guideline revisions are posted on our website. How do I? Guideline revisions. We've increased the minimum scores for readiness. We'll talk about that in more detail as we get further into the presentation. Treatment of other state funding sources. We allow you to have other state funding sources, but they just can't fund the VHIP units. We've increased the minimum points for the service plan, and we have a new scoring category, which we'll go into in more detail later. And the new scoring category, access to location efficiency and access to services. Guideline revisions. Oh, let's see, I'm not quite certain here that I'm going the right way with my presentation. So this first bullet has been a real issue for us over the last year, and we're meeting on it regularly. It has to do with the 9% tax credits. We're really encouraging you to try and do projects with 4% tax credits because some projects from round 1 and round 2 are butting up the 5-year liquidation deadline. And that 5-year period is not something that we have the ability to extend. It's out of our hands. And we don't want to have to tell a project, you got to give your money back. So we're asking that you try to do 4% projects. They're just much easier to break ground and get the ball rolling. Minimum required ratio of units restricted to veterans. We'll talk about that in more detail. And we're trying to avoid over-concentration of persons with disabilities so that we don't isolate. This thing is, Eligible projects remain the same: transitional, supportive, and low-income housing. Applicants must be nonprofits, for-profit developers, or counties, or both as joint applicants. And the types are similar: new construction, acquisition, or rehab, and rehab only. And now, application overview. I'm going to talk in detail mainly just about the packaging of your application, and then my colleagues will go into more detail on specifics for the various aspects of the application. And it's really important, and it seems kind of menial or minutia, the details, the tediousness of the application packaging, but it's really important that you put the application together in the manner in which we're asking for it, because we don't want to miss things. We need it as detailed as possible so that we're able to find everything you're submitted. If you put it in the wrong section, we can't find it, we might overlook it. You can just imagine that the applications come in a 6-inch ring binder, and that can hold over a ream of paper. So yeah, we're living in the dark ages. We need the paper. We also need it electronically. But with the paper submission, it's really important to follow the instructions. The application, keynotes, and packaging document is posted on the website. That's 5 pages long, a very small font with a lot of detail. This is a cutout of what the first page of that instruction looks like. And this last bullet here down at the bottom where I say, use a plain sheet of color paper marked with the exhibit number and state not applicable. Just because something's not applicable in your application doesn't mean you should leave it out, because then we get wondering, oh, Is it somewhere else and we have to hunt around for it? We can't find it. We don't know why it's not there. Don't leave anything out. Colored paper. This sounds like we're, back in grammar school, but we need you to put colored paper in between all of the attachments to the exhibits. It just helps us when we're reviewing the hard paper applications. We have very specific instructions regarding the dividers and labeling for all of the sections. This is an example. This too is included within the 5 pages of instructions. You can see how they're lined out for the universal application and also the supplemental application for the VHHP portion of the application. So this is actually a template that you can use with your printer to print out the tabs for all the dividers within the application. I'll show you in a minute what the spine and the front of the binder should look like. I know we're being really specific, but it just helps us when we get 30 applications and we're happy little worker bees in our cubicles trying to look through all these binders. The more uniform they can be, the easier it is for us to get your applications reviewed and hopefully approved. This is a sample of the spine on the left and then the cover. We ask that you use the same colors and that it be in this format. Very detailed, we know. The CD or flash drive, it must contain everything that's in the paper binder. So it's got to be in Excel format, and please label it just as it is in the paper binder. Universal application overview. This is just some information for you. If you're going through the application and you don't have enough room to complete something electronically, open up another application and use that section to complete the information that you need, so you can have more than one page of any one section if you run out of room. Don't be typing along and then it just cuts off and then that's the end of the information. The Universal Application General tab, that's the first section that we'll look at, and it's probably the most important section for us. The information within this tab should flow through both the Universal Application and the Supplemental Application that's specific to the project. And the information that you provide us needs to be the same throughout both applications. Don't give us different information in one portion and change it up for another. It's very confusing to us. And initially we can't contact you to find out what the correct information is. So the Contacts tab is the second item that we'll look at, and that too is very, very important, particularly when you're looking at the senior. When you're looking here at the senior official, make sure that person is reflected in the organizational documents. There is a general tab instruction in the supplemental application that will give you more information on this, and then one of my colleagues will speak in more detail about this as we go along. This tab, the Development Sources tab, the financing commitments, this can be a make or break for your applications. There can't be any gray area with regard to these financing commitments. They must have the sponsor name, the project name, the site address, or the parcel or legal description. They have to have the amount, the interest rate, and the terms of financing. And the commitment must be fully executed by all parties, and it must say committed. We realize that this is not always possible when you're dealing with your subsidies. Those commitments can be kind of non-commitments and fuzzy, and we'll talk about that more in detail later on how to deal with that situation when you can't get a housing authority to say, okay, we're committing to you. We like to think that we've made it easier for you by giving you red text highlights of things that need to be attached and important instructions. Always, always, always include extra pages if you need it to give explanation. We do have drop downs that help for added entry. The sponsor org docs, we go over these in great detail. We have sample resolutions via hyperlinks. We'll talk more about that as well. The scoring section is automated. That helps you to figure out what your total point score will be. And before I hand over to Kendra, I want to just say that we provide our contact information at the end of this PowerPoint presentation. We'll be posting this online hopefully early next week. We encourage all of you to contact us if you have questions. Prior to the deadline, we are happy to look at documents and see if they are what we need or if they work. Email us. You can send us attachments. We'll go over it. We'll let you know ahead of time. So email or call. Don't just be in question about something and doubting or not knowing whether what you have is accurate and completing the questions that we're asking. Please email and call us. So I think that's it for me.
I'm Kendra Gubadulin, and I'm one of the underwriters who will be handling the VHHP applications. Now, I will be covering housing types and occupancy requirements. We have 3 different housing types. One is affordable. Can't hear it right now. Can you hear me okay? You also have supportive housing and transitional housing. Now, the affordable housing portion, I'll be covering the Resident Services Coordination Plan, and CalVet, Sean will be covering the Supportive Services Plan, which is for the transitional and supportive housing types. Now, occupancy restrictions, these include households that are restricted to 1 or more veterans with incomes not to exceed 60% of area median income. At least 45% of these units should be restricted to 30% of area median income. Now, a new change under this round is that 25% of all units are to be restricted to veterans. Past rounds, it was always 20%. Now, for supportive housing and transitional VHHP units, we look at those units being restricted to veterans who are homeless, homeless with a disability, or chronic homeless. So we have 3 different categories. As of the last round, we had a limit on projects with more than 20 units. Those projects will need to restrict half or less to chronic homeless or homeless with a disability. So we do have that restriction as of the last round. Now, occupancy restrictions will apply for the full term of the regulatory agreement. For those loans that are paid off in advance, we still have the 55-year regulatory agreement on these. Okay, occupancy restrictions based on conditions of separation from military service are subject to HCD approval. We do look at veterans separated from military service under certain conditions who qualify for VA health care when required by a public agency. However, at least 10% of these VHHP units must be restricted or prioritized, actually, for occupancy by veterans who are ineligible for VA benefits or HUD-VASH. Section 113 tenant selection also applies to supportive housing and transitional housing, but not to affordable housing. fair housing compliance for age and or gender restrictions. For the same-sex segregated projects, you'll follow the instructions in our NOFA. And for senior projects, you can look at our guidelines under section 109E. Compliance certifications. Tenant selection 113 for supportive housing and transitional housing projects shall be selected using the coordinated access system. Housing first practices for all supportive housing and transitional projects, you'll need to complete a supplemental A4 compliance certification form. Now, the Resident Services Coordination Plan, which applies to affordable housing, has 3 different categories. We have quality and quantity of services provided, resident involvement, and adequacy of the services budget and reliability of services funding. Now, under the quality and quantity of services, we're going to see that they're veteran-centric, that they're appropriate for the target population. So we're going to see that there's staff experience, that there's credentials, job duties that include appropriate requirements, and veteran cultural competency. And then finally, we'll look at the linkages with local systems for ending homelessness and serving veterans. Now, the adequacy, resident involvement, which will be for 2 points. It's an important area. Strategies to engage residents in building community and operations. We also look at how residents are engaged in services planning and operations. And then finally, we encourage you to use tenant satisfaction surveys to inform and improve the services for building operations and property management. Now, adequacy of services budget. We're going to look at the budgeted amounts for the consistency of these amounts with other sections in the plan. We'll look at completeness and accuracy and clarity of the budgeted document. And then finally, the percentage that's committed at the time of application. And we encourage at least 25% minimum. Now, those projects that include both transitional and supportive housing as well as affordable housing, we will require that both plans be submitted. So keep that in mind when you're including both populations. That brings us to Evan.
Hi, I'm Evan. I work at HCD for John Nunn, just upstairs here. I will be discussing the underwriting process. As we receive applications, we go through our threshold and eligibility review. Out of all of those applications who pass threshold and eligibility, we'll move on to scoring, which we will then rank the projects based on geographic region, as John discussed earlier. And of those projects, then we'll move on to our feasibility review. Threshold and eligibility requirements. This isn't the entirety of the threshold requirements, but these are main points that I wanted to point out. We do have a minimum point score requirement for overall supportive services plan readiness and leverage of subsidies, which I'll discuss in a moment. We have development team experience, which is a key aspect for the VHHP program, serving this homeless veteran population. We do require extensive development team experience. Additionally, 25% of total units must serve veterans, and of the VHHP-assisted units, 45% of them must be restricted to no greater than 30% AMI. So we're looking for a balanced target population. We also have disabled veteran business enterprise requirements that we'll discuss later in our presentation. This is our minimum point score threshold requirements. So we have 3 different project types. We have with supportive housing, which our overall is 110 out of 150 maximum. We then have our supportive services plan, minimum of 15 of maximum 22. Our readiness to proceed is a minimum of 13 with a maximum of 25. This has changed for round 4, so it's key to note that we increased the readiness to proceed up to 13 points from 7.5 points last year, and the maximum from 15 to 25 in round 4. And it's key to note we also have a leverage of subsidies minimum, so all of our projects will have rental subsidies or a subsidy of some kind. Additionally, we have without supportive services, so just an affordable project is our minimum of 75, a much lower minimum, but a maximum of 95. So you're competing a 95 project, maximum score of 95 versus a maximum score of 150, so that's key to note. And then a transitional housing project will have a minimum score of 90, so slightly less than 110 for a supportive housing project. These are our maximum point scores broken down. As you can see, our biggest section of points comes from the development team experience that I'll discuss in a minute. We have a difference with just an affordable project on the right-hand column of 15 versus the 33 that comes from the lead service provider experience. You're not going to have that with just an affordable project. It's key to note, as I was saying before, the readiness to proceed increased to 25 this year. That was a jump of 10 points. That's a huge jump from this round. This was due to the fact that some of our round 1 and 2 projects have been bumping up against this liquidation deadline and have not been moving forward, and we're really looking to change the guidelines year over year to get projects awarded that are ready to move forward. So this increase was trying to get projects that are more ready to move forward. Additionally, at the bottom, our location efficiency and access to destinations is a new scoring category. I'll speak to in a moment. It has a maximum of 5 points. Development team experience, maximum of 33 for supportive housing or transitional housing, and affordable housing 15. As I was saying before, the veteran homeless population which we'll talk to in the supportive services plan more, but we're looking for experience with our developers that are, if you're proposing a supportive housing project, we're looking for development experience of supportive housing project, not just an affordable project altogether. We have ownership experience as well as property management and lead service provider experience. The VIP program is one of our most stringent on development experience, and so it's key to note these areas. They haven't changed from the previous round, but again, it's key to note. Readiness to proceed increased to a maximum of 25 points. We changed the breakdown of our 6 categories. They are the same as last year. However, we have weighted them this year versus 2.5 points per category. So these are the breakdowns here. Key to note before that Sherry was talking about our enforceable funding commitments. As you can see, the top and the bottom on this slide are the construction sources and permanent sources. You really need to have all the key points that Sherry mentioned earlier in the presentation. That's also outlined in the instruction sheet for the VIP supplemental application in the beginning, as well as in our keynotes and packaging document of what's needed in an enforceable funding commitment. Location efficiency and access to services. This is a new scoring category. It's broken into 3 different sections. We have, you can receive up to 3 points for US EPA Walkability Index You can get 0, 1, 2, or 3 points in that category based on where your project lies on a map. We also have access to transportation, so if your project is located within half a mile of a qualified transportation center, a bus stop, if we're in the Bay Area, BART or certain train stops that qualify, you can receive those 2 points. We also, our third category is access to services, and so we're looking for projects that are near qualified grocery store, child care center, or a medical center, so located within half a mile as well. The specifics on those are outlined in our guidelines, so please refer to that for more information. On to underwriting feasibility. So the VIP program primarily follows the UMRs. However, there are some distinctions that I wanted to point out that are specific and different to the VIP program. If the VIP loan request is a small size, we're saying $1.5 million or less than 15% of total development cost, the department's willing to work with the other lenders in the project to make the project work. It's key to note that that supportive services coordination and case management are the only 2 positions that allows to pay through project operations and cash flow, and costs associated with just those 2 positions, and I'll talk about that in a second. Under the UMRs, the new 2017 UMRs, balloon payments are allowed under specific exceptions, and those are outlined in our UMR section 8310F and G. And the asset management fee has increased to align with our 2017 UMR, so that's a change from the previous round of VIP. Additionally, the VIP program, if all projects must have a subsidy of some kind. So if your project has a renewable project-based rental assistance, we only require a 1-year transition reserve. This is different than most all of our other programs at the department. But for other projects with subsidies that are non-renewable, we will still require that 2-year transition reserve. Developer fee limits, the VIP program follows the 9% tax credit rules, and if your project is proposing tax credits, and then for all other projects, if you don't have tax credits, we follow the UMRs in section 8312. Our use of operating cash flow, this, as I was saying before, the VIP program restricts uses towards the services to only supportive services coordination and case management costs and costs associated just to those 2 positions. We also have a maximum of what can be paid in a project based on your unit mix, and this is broken down in this slide. It's also in our guidelines. It's key to note that this is slightly different than what our Uniform Multifamily Regulations, UMRs, allow. So the VIP program is a little different in that regard, but this is the maximums, and it's, again, tied to just what's paid through the project operations are just tied to supportive service coordination and to case management. Some good practices that I wanted to express to you guys that we've seen in the past for not only the VIP program, but for all of our programs at the department. Once the application deadline is over and passes, we cannot introduce additional documentation after that time. So if you miss one document, we can't contact you and reintroduce that document after the deadline period. So it's critical to get a complete application in up front We're available, as Sherry was saying earlier, anytime up before the application deadline to consult. You can call us, you can email us regarding your application, but after that application deadline hits, we're not allowed to introduce any new documentation. One key area I wanted to point out is site control. Many of our projects are getting tax credits, and they'll set up an entity structure with a limited partnership, a managing general partner, and an entity controlling that whole structure. And this site control sometimes is held with the limited partnership. And we need to see that site control is held for the project. So our applicant sponsor will be the entity maybe controlling that whole structure, but we may not get all the organizational documents to see the limited partnership has site control and is controlled by the entity that is showing development experience. So we need to see org docs from the limited partnership, from the managing general partner, and from that entity that is showing the experience in the application. So it's key to put all those documents in your application. And as I said before, any document that's missing cannot be introduced. So make sure that you have all of your documents in the application up front. Additionally, on site control, if your project is proposed over multiple parcels, or maybe it's a scattered site, we need to show site control for every single parcel, or else that project will not move forward if one maybe parcel is not held in site control. So even if you have maybe a DDA with the city, maybe you have fee title, or purchase agreement options, so you have several different forms of site control, we need to see that every single parcel in that project it does indeed have site control and can be shown through the organizational docs to be held with the entity holding that shows development experience. Additionally, all our projects have a subsidy. So the subsidy commitment letter is pretty critical. We understand that it's hard to get a firm commitment from our localities sometimes, but we do require a subsidy commitment letter. And so if you do not have a subsidy commitment letter, that may constitute a failed threshold because we do have the minimum point score for that category. If you have any questions on whether your letter that you received will qualify as a commitment, please contact us before the application deadline. We don't want to get past the application deadline and have to make a disqualification because that letter is not up to our standards. So please contact us before the application deadline. Additionally, we implemented in the guidelines due to the fact that we've had projects not moving forward, that after the VIP award, within 18 months, if a project that proposes tax credits does not apply for those tax credits, the department may rescind that VIP award. So that's something to note that's new for this round as well. And I'll pass it on to Sean, who will discuss the supportive services plan.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Evan. And before I get started with the supportive services plan, I just want to do a little shout out and introduce some of the CalVet staff that's joining us today. First, I want to thank HCD, our partners. Really excited about the strength of our partnership and sort of where we're going, the direction that we're heading, and the things that we're doing together. It's really, and thank you for having us here. This is this NOFA application process is really the wheelhouse of HCD, and they've had us join them today, and really very grateful for that. Joined here with my colleagues, up here in Sacramento, Nicole Neary and Derek Rose. You'll be hearing from them a little bit later, with additional parts of the presentation. We also have Bobby Park here in the back there. Her role as the local interagency network coordinator is critical for the program. One of the goals that at CalVet we concentrate on is really bringing parties together for this program, and that's bringing development expertise and bringing supportive services expertise, bringing local officials together to collaborate. And not many projects can succeed without that kind of collaboration. So Bobby's role is real critical for that. Bobby is retiring after a very accomplished career. She'll be with us just a few more weeks here, but we do have a very detailed and good succession plan for Bobby, and so her replacement will be very knowledgeable and qualified to assist. Basically, the role of the local interagency network coordinator is to provide contacts and resources for veteran services, veteran service organizations, and various aspects of benefits and services that veterans would be interested in. So those veterans in your buildings, it'd be good to know your local interagency network coordinator at CalVet to assist those veterans. So with that, I'll go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes of the supportive services plan. So a lot of this is going to be repetitive from what Kendra had already spoke about with the resident services coordination plan. That duplication is really in the resident involvement and the services budget. So I'll spend most of my time talking about the services. A second ago, you heard Evan talk about the point structure for the program, the application. It's 150 points. The supportive services plan is worth 22 points. So in the grand scheme, it's not necessarily the biggest chunk. It's not as prominent, but from the perspective of the veteran, this might be the most critical piece of the whole deal. The points have increased to 22 points. It was 20 last round. Those 2 extra points were allocated in the quality and quantity of services section, and we'll talk about that in just a second here. Okay, so supportive services. If you haven't been involved with the program, you may be wondering what that means. We have services broken down, and these are basically services directly provided to veterans living in your building, and they're broken down into minimum required and enhanced services. That's sort of how we have them delineated. The minimum required services are basically those mental health, physical health, substance abuse treatment, connectivity to veteran benefits, counseling for veteran benefits, those types of services. The enhanced services definitely would make you a stronger application to include enhanced services. Those include education services, employment services. Depending on the population, you might include life skills training, those type of soft skills to interact, and services of that nature. What you'll find in the application this round, different from the last round's application, is that we really made it very clear on the portion where you identify how the services are provided, how you separate the services provided to those veterans that do qualify for VA services, and that 10% that Kendra spoke about a little earlier, that 10% of units, of those VHHP units that are reserved for veterans that would not qualify for VA benefits. So you'll want to be able to talk about both of those scenarios, how those services will be provided, and it's made pretty clear on this application version. The other notable thing about the application is that we've also added some examples of what we mean by the enhanced services. In the past application, we just sort of left the table there in the application open for your input and adding services. This round, we've provided some guidance on what we think are appropriate enhanced services, and we've also left some part of that open for you to add services in addition to what we've provided. So you'll notice that when you get into the application. So when we talk about supportive services plan, what we're really talking about is sort of the roadmap for what the lead service provider is responsible for. So you'll talk about services, but in addition to that, you'll find on the application there's spots for for you to talk about the tenant selection process and how that looks, and you'll explain that in your application. It also talks about security and safety policies and procedures. You'll want to talk about that. Talks about the service budget. We'll get in that in a second. And it's much more than just the services. So you'll want to take note of that and carefully look that over while you're completing that. One of the most important things about the services, and you'll see up here, we talk about expertise, experience, and training. Services have to be sort of tailored around the veteran, right? So what we're looking for is experience working with veterans. You'll want to talk about that on your application. You'll want to talk about how the services involve veteran cultural competency. As a veteran myself, Marine Corps veteran, can tell you that to be effective in serving veterans, you really need to understand where the veteran comes from. Need to understand the experiences and the experience of transitioning from military to civilian life. It's really important to know those things when you're working with veterans, especially those that come out of the service with service-connected disabilities or mental health needs. So we really want to see that really clear in the application. And so the service delivery model, that's where the extra 2 points were allocated this round. So we've really gone to great lengths to really identify the clinical interventions and the typical service delivery model aspects that we would like to see in the service delivery model at your building. Those include elements of cultural competency. They include clinical explanations like the trauma-informed care, motivational interviewing, things of that nature. So you'll really want to get detailed with that, and we've provided separate spaces for each of the different aspects of service delivery. Very important part of the process here. The other part of the supported services plan is talking about accessibility to the VA and the services provided there. That's going to be a big part of your application. Let's face it, most of your veterans living there will be served by the VA. You might have HUD-VASH vouchers. Those tenants will be directly served by the VA. The VA will serve as the case manager for those types of services. So it's real important to be linked up with the VA, right, and to understand who your local HUD-VASH coordinator is, who the network coordinator is for homeless programs at the VA. But beyond that, you also want to connect with the county veteran service office, right? The county veteran service officer is very fluent on VA trends and changes, very fluent on other veteran resources. Bobby and our CalVet local interagency network coordinator works real hand in hand with the CVSO. So you'll want to know who that person is by name. There's a spot on the application for you to identify that person. So you'll really want to know that, as well as the VA staff that you're working with for HUD-VASH or just for coordinating services for veterans. So very key, knowing those people by name and having those connections, and we can help with that if needed. But the other part of accessibility is getting the veteran to the services. People may often overlook that, but it's getting the veterans to the services or getting the services to the veteran, right? And we'll want to explain how you plan on doing that in your application. Not only for the VA eligible veterans, but also for those veterans that are in the building that aren't qualified or eligible for VA services. So got to have a way of getting either the services to them or them to the services. So housing first, not a project gets approved in the state here with state funding that doesn't involve housing first principles. And so those are critical to having a firm grasp and understanding what housing first is important. It really is. It impacts the services greatly, because with housing first, the services have to be voluntary and they have to be flexible, right? So a condition of entry into the building, cannot be that they undertake services. It has to be optional. It has to be on the veteran's terms, basically. So your tenant selection process also can't exclude veterans for their criminal history, for their rental history, for their credit history. Those things cannot be barriers to entry to your building, to the selection. So really important to understand housing first. Also includes basically engagement, and we'll talk about that. Really important part of the process here. Veterans, especially those that are experiencing chronic homelessness, they really have to have some involvement, and they have to be engaged, and it's going to sort of keep them on the path to thriving, and we really want to focus on that and hope to see that on the supportive services plan. Other part of the plan is the physical building space. We want to see how you intend to provide the services, right? The on-site community space, right, where services can be, meetings can happen, right? The service provider can meet the veteran there. We want to see how the building is laid out for that. One of the big focuses that we're talking about with round 4 is serving some of the vulnerable populations throughout the state, some of those vulnerable veteran populations. And what we mean by that are basically the single-parent veteran households, women veterans, and other vulnerable populations. So we really want to see in the physical building space, if you're planning to serve those vulnerable populations, we want to see in the building space, in the physical design of the building, how that will be covered. And then again, linkages. We talked about linkages with the VA, the CVSO, but most importantly, for those, especially for those veterans that don't qualify for VA, is linkages to local community-based services, right? So we're talking, community-based services, faith-based services, anything in the local area. You'll want to get your finger on the pulse on what those services are available in your area where you're proposing your project. That was really the gist of the plan, and we have the resident engagement, and I'll expand on that a little bit. And Kendra did a good job, kind of explaining what we mean by this, and it's really not a whole lot different for those supportive housing and transitional housing plans. Really want to get the residents involved with building operations. Any way that you can do that. I mean, there's many ways. Be creative. Yeah, with the yard upkeep. Repairs in the buildings. There's many ways. Talk about that in your plan. How you get the veterans involved with the building. And this might, it may be a no-brainer, but have the veteran involved with their services planning, right? That's a big piece. They want to empower veterans to sort of control their own service structure and their trajectory. So involving them in the service delivery planning and process. That's real important. And then again, the tenant satisfaction survey, real important to collect that feedback from the veteran and get their input on how their living is at your building, and basically we're serving the veterans, so we want to make sure that their voices are heard with their experience. And the services budget, this is nearly identical to what Kendra talked about, so I won't belabor it, but we really want to make sure that it's clear and concise how the budget, basically the sources that you're talking about, they got to match up consistent with the rest of the plan, and they really have to be clear. When you're talking about local sources, identifying the source as local source, well, it probably isn't exactly clear enough. So you want to make sure that you identify the program, exactly where the source is coming from. So that's all I got on the supportive services plan. Thank you. I'm going to call Derek up here to talk about the DVB portion of the program.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out today. My name is Derek Rose. I'm an analyst for the VHHP program, specialize in disabled veteran business enterprise outreach and coordination. And from here on out, I'll refer to it simply as DVBE. Keep it short and simple today. I'm just going to briefly discuss the DVBE requirements for the VHHP program and how we at CalVet can assist in meeting those requirements as well. So as stated in the VHHP guidelines in section 109, it states that entities certified as disabled veteran business enterprises shall receive an amount at least equal to 5% of total construction costs for work performed on the project or for materials and supplies provided. And in the supportive services section of the application, it is going to ask for a DVBE utilization plan. And that is going to ask for a single point of contact who serves as the project's DVBE plan administrator. And that individual is the one who is ultimately responsible for meeting that 5% requirement. And in that utilization plan, it is essentially the detailed outreach methods that you would use to seek out DVBE subcontractors for the project. It could be advertising in trade publications, contacting DVBE organizations, or any other type of methods that you would use to seek out those DVBEs to solicit bids for the project. We at CalVet will then review the sponsor's progress towards that 5% requirement based on the methods listed in that utilization plan. One key thing to take note of is that there may be negative points awarded for future applications if the project does fail to meet the 5% DVBE requirement. But there could be a possibility for a waiver, and I'll briefly touch on that towards the end here. So how can we assist at CalVet? We would request at a minimum 30 days prior to bid solicitation due dates for the project that we would receive a copy of the solicitation or the request for proposal. And in that solicitation, we would also request a copy of the plans or specifications for the project so that then we could forward that to our database of DVBEs who state that they service the project's region, or at least state that they service the project's regions in their supplier profile. We can let them know where the project is, who the point of contact for the project is, whether it's through on the general contractor side or you as the project sponsor as well. So after the project has seeked out its DVBE solicitations and prior to the project breaking ground, we are required to have a copy of the pre-construction report, and we would be happy to provide a template for that report as well. And in this report, it is essentially the tentative agreement between the project and the DVBEs that will be serving on that project as well. It's going to ask for who the DVBE is, along with their state certification number and the contract amount that they expect to receive. We'll then reach out to that DVBE, confirm they do in fact intend to perform on the project, and can verify the contract amount. And if for any reason a DVBE is dropped from the project, we would expect for the project to contact us so we can conduct additional outreach to find another DVBE to bring onto the project. So as the project is ready for completion, and prior to the program's permanent loan closing, we are required to have a post-construction report, which is essentially the same template as the pre-construction report, but is going to serve as the final calculation for the DVBE requirements. Again, we will verify who the DVBEs are. We will contact them and confirm that they did in fact perform for this specific dollar amount, and that will serve as the final calculation for the project's requirement. So if for any reason the project does fail to meet that 5%, we could be in a position to grant a waiver. It is important to note that the critical part of that is referring to the DVBE utilization plan. As long as your outreach methods are consistent with what was listed in that plan, as far as who you contacted, what the result of that contact was with that DVBE, a comparison of their bid compared to a non-DVBE that was brought on the project, as long as that all of that, those efforts are documented and it shows consistency, we would deem a waiver appropriate for that 5% requirement. So that is basically the ins and outs of the DVBE requirement for the program, and I'll turn it over to my colleague Nicole, who will speak about the veterans hiring requirements.
Good Good morning, everyone. So my name is Nicole Neary. I'm also with VHHP, so I'm an analyst. So I will be going over the Veterans Hiring Plan requirements. It's a little short, so just letting you know that in advance. So also in Section 109 in the VHHP guidelines, it states to have a good faith effort when hiring veterans. So there's a spot in the supportive services section, which is also known as Exhibit A8, where we ask you, what is your hiring plan? How would you go about hiring veterans and into your organization? What outreach methods would you be using? So, for example, would you be using advertisement? Would you be working with organizations to find veterans seeking employment? So we kind of just want to know what you guys would do. So to better assist with finding veterans to hire, we're developing a guideline. It's called the Employer Resource Guide. This guide will help with direct hiring with no contracts. The guide includes resources from the federal government. That includes Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Labor. Also resources from the state of California. So that could include the Employment Development Department. And also the community-based veteran service resources. So that could include Helmets to Hard Hats, Work for Warriors. So there's a lot of resources in this Employer Resource Guide. Like I said, it's under development. So that concludes the veteran hiring plan requirements. So now I'll turn it over to John Nunn.
Well, you've been given a lot of information, a great deal of information. Let me echo what Sherry said earlier, and something that we always offer to potential sponsors or applicants. Please feel free to give us a call and make an arrangement to come look at a successful application. That's really, if you've never filled out an application for HCD before, and if you've never filled out an application for VIP, that would probably be your best bet. That would be much better than this presentation. That'd be much better than just reading through the things that are online about VIP. I can tell you that we have had several people who have taken advantage of this. As a matter of fact, more and more every year. The last time we had an applicant who had failed twice. And they kept saying, well, what's wrong with my application? I said, well, come on in, we'll look at a successful application and you can compare yours to that. So that's what we did. We looked at their application and we looked at a successful application. Their application looked like this, a successful application looked like that. And it was mainly the services plan. Again, Sean talked about how, you know, it's only a portion of the points. It's a very important portion of the points for this program. So to get that right goes a long way toward getting a good score. Are there any questions? As I said before, we have all of our contact information is here. It'll all be on the website. And anytime you'd like to come in and take a look at an application, please do that. We don't do anything more important than that. We can send you an electronic copy, but it's not like looking at a physical copy. Yeah, it will. Next week it'll be on. We'll also have a webinar next week, next Thursday. Same material. Probably give you a better chance to ask questions, though, because you'll have reviewed the material by then.
If you have any questions, please ask. John, we're recording. If a question comes up, you have a question, just repeat it to capture the recording.
Chris, do you have a question? Yes. Why did I know that?
Affordable housing project versus supportive housing, there's 150 points or 95 points. So, in affordable housing, private agency.
Not really. Well, there's a big preference for supportive housing, especially with this clientele. Again, we're talking about people who are coming right off the streets and into housing. We're trying to house the unhoused. So they need supportive services. Exactly. That's the way this program was set up. Well, there's a category in there because initially when the program first started, no one knew what the scores were going to actually range. As it's happened over each round, we've increased the scores. So now it really wouldn't compete. That, well, it's a couple of things. One, we calculate your units based upon 9% anyway. However, if you have a 4% project, you actually qualify for more money per unit. So there's that. That's really the preference. Oh, yeah, right. Right. Because because you don't really have to wait for rounds. So it is a big advantage. What we've seen this last round where we did 16 projects, only one of those was at 9%. By contrast, we had 15 that were at 4%. 3 of those are up and under construction right now and have been for 6 months. So the speed with which they act it's not even comparable. That's why we like the 4% projects. If you have 9%, I mean, if you have a really good tiebreaker score and you can, basically guarantee that you're going to get 9%, by all means go for it. But it usually takes a couple of rounds. Any other questions? Well, please feel free to post your questions to HCD Vets, to give us a call at any point in time.
I'll bring up the contact information there for
Go ahead.
for the recording. There's our contact information at CalVet if you have any questions regarding the support. If you have questions regarding the supportive services plan, DVBE, veteran hiring, veteran service organizations, anything veteran, please contact us. We're here to help and assist. And then here's the contact information for the staff at HCD. Thank you.
If there are no further questions, thank you very much for coming. And I hope you'll all submit great projects. Thank you.